The golden hour painted Long Beach in shades of amber and rose as families strolled along the boardwalk, their laughter mixing with a rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. Street musicians played soft melodies while couples walked hand in hand, and children chased seagulls across the warm sand. It was one of those perfect California evenings that made everything feel suspended in time, peaceful and sacred. Among the scattered crowd, John Cena walked quietly with his 4-year-old daughter Bella, her tiny hand wrapped securely in his. She wore her favorite pink dress with butterfly prints, and her other arm clutched a stuffed panda with one missing button eye. The wrestling superstar had traded his usual spotlight for something far more precious, uninterrupted time with his daughter. "Daddy, can birds have names?" Bella asked, pointing to a seagull circling above the wooden pier. Her eyes sparkled with a kind of curiosity that made John's heart swell with pure joy. John smiled, his voice gentle and warm. "Of course they can. That one up there probably has a name like Greta. She looks like she's in charge of all the other birds." Bella giggled, her laughter like music. "Greta, that's so funny. Daddy." They stopped near the railing overlooking the water, where the setting sun began to kiss the horizon. The ocean sparkled in brilliant pinks and golds, creating a masterpiece that no camera could capture. Bella leaned forward slightly, peering into the waves below with wonder. "Can we come back tomorrow?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. "Absolutely," John replied, brushing a strand of her dark hair from her forehead. "But only if you promise to go to bed tonight without giving me 100 different excuses." Bella grinned mischievously. "I promise. Maybe just 5 excuses." John chuckled, his heart full. "Deal." It was a perfect moment, one of those rare slices of pure happiness that he tried to hold on to forever. Since Bella had been born, evenings like this were precious gifts. His schedule was usually packed with filming, appearances, and obligations that pulled his attention in every direction. But tonight was different. Tonight was just for her, just for them. Then everything changed in an instant. From somewhere behind him came a sound that didn't belong in this peaceful scene, a sharp, short cry, a child's cry. It was muffled, cut off too quickly, like someone had covered a small mouth with their hand. John's body tensed immediately. Years of athletic training and street instincts honed in wrestling rings and real-life situations clicked into place like pieces of a deadly puzzle. He turned his head slightly, scanning the area behind him without alarming Bella. His eyes swept across the boardwalk, looking for the source of that disturbing sound. Another cry followed, more urgent, more desperate, raw with terror. The words that came next made his blood run cold. "Let me go. Please." John's eyes locked onto movement about 30 yards away, hidden in the shadows behind a concrete support column near the boat dock. A man in a police uniform stood partially obscured by the structure. He was holding a child, a little girl who looked no older than 4. She had no shoes on her tiny feet, and her thin arms were flailing wildly as she tried to break free from his grip. John narrowed his eyes, every instinct screaming that something was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. The way the officer held the child wasn't protective or caring. It was rough, controlling, dangerous. The man kept looking over his shoulder nervously, like someone planning something terrible who didn't want to be caught. "Bella," John said quietly, squatting down beside his daughter. His voice remained calm, but she could sense the sudden seriousness in his tone. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Bella asked, her innocent eyes searching his face. "Nothing you need to worry about. Sweetheart, I need you to sit right here on this bench, okay? Stay with your panda and don't move until I come back. Can you promise me that?" Bella nodded, clutching her stuffed animal tighter. "I promise." John squeezed her shoulder gently, his touch conveying both love and urgency. Then he stood up, his jaw set with determination, and began walking swiftly toward the shadows where nightmare was about to unfold. As he moved closer, his worst suspicions were confirmed. The little girl was crying now, small, heartbreaking whimpers as a uniformed man held her awkwardly by the arms. There was nothing protective about his grip, nothing official, nothing right. The officer's badge was smudged with dirt, his uniform stained and wrinkled. His face was weathered and bitter, his eyes holding something dark and twisted. John Cena had faced many opponents in his life, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to confront, a predator hiding behind a badge, and a moment that would change everything forever. John stopped several feet away from the shadow-shrouded scene, his powerful frame tense and ready. The little girl's quiet sobs echoed off the concrete support column, a sound that cut through him like a knife. Up close, he could see her more clearly. Dirty clothes, tangled hair, and eyes wide with terror. She couldn't have been older than 4, the same age as his own Bella. "Hey!" John called out, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "What's going on here?" The officer turned slowly, and John got his first clear look at the man's face. His badge number was smudged with what looked like deliberate date, making it unreadable. His uniform was stained and disheveled, as if he'd been living rough or working in places where appearances didn't matter. But it was his eyes that told the real story, cold, calculating, and filled with something that made John's skin crawl. "Mind your business," the man muttered, his grip tightening on the struggling child. John's tone didn't change, but his fists clenched at his sides. "That's a child. What are you doing with her?" "She's fine," the officer replied, but his voice lacked any conviction. "Just a runaway. I'm taking her in." John looked at the little girl, whose tear-stained face showed nothing but pure terror. "She doesn't look fine. She looks terrified." The child hiccuped through her sobs and managed to speak in a tiny, broken voice. "I'm not garbage. Please don't hurt me." Those words hit John like a physical blow. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't protection. This was something evil wearing the uniform meant to serve and protect. "Put her down. Now," John said, taking a step forward. His voice had dropped to a dangerously low register that anyone who knew him would recognize as a final warning. The officer didn't flinch. Instead, his lips twisted into something resembling a smile. "You don't know what you're stepping into, pal. Walk away while you can." "I don't need to know anything except that a child is being hurt," John replied. "Let her go." The man's facade began to crack, revealing the monster underneath. "She's nobody. No records, no family. You think these rats don't just pop out of the alleys every day? She'll be another statistic in a week anyway. I'm just speeding up the inevitable." John felt his world tilt. "What did you just say?" "I'm cleaning up the system," the officer continued, his voice growing more twisted and confident. "You celebrities think you know everything about justice, about suffering. You don't. This is real work. Necessary work. You think she's a first? Please. I've done what others won't do, and they thank me for it behind closed doors." The little girl screamed as a man began moving toward the edge of the dock, where the dark water waited below like an open mouth. John realized with horror what he was witnessing, not just abuse, but attempted murder. This wasn't a rogue moment of violence. This was calculated, practiced evil. "She can't swim," the child cried out desperately. "Please, I can't swim." That's when John moved. He lunged forward with the explosive power that had made him a champion, but the officer had anticipated resistance. As John closed the distance, the man lifted the little girl higher, stepping dangerously close to the dock's edge. For a terrifying moment, John thought he was too late. "One more step and she goes in," the officer hissed. "You want her death on your hands." But John had spent years reading opponents, understanding timing, calculating risks in split seconds. He could see the man's weight distribution, the way he held the child, the angle of his stance. This wasn't someone trained in combat. This was a predator used to victims who couldn't fight back. "You're not going to drop her," John said, his voice eerily calm. "Because you need her alive to have power over her. Dead, she's just evidence of what you really are." The officer's eyes flickered with uncertainty for just a moment. It was all John needed. He feinted left, then drove his shoulder into the man's midsection with devastating force. The impact knocked the officer off balance, and his grip on the little girl loosened. She began to fall, but John's hand shot out like lightning, catching her wrist just inches before the dark water could swallow her whole. With one powerful motion, he pulled her against his chest, feeling her tiny heart beating like a trapped bird. She clung to him with desperate strength, her small fingers digging into his shirt as if he were her only anchor in a world gone mad. The officer staggered backward, dazed but not defeated. His hand went to his belt, and John saw the gleam of metal in the dying light. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," the man growled, pulling out a taser. I've got immunity. You lay a hand on me, and it's your career that ends, not mine. John slowly lowered a little girl to the ground, positioning himself protectively between her and the threat. When he looked back at the officer, his eyes held something that made a man take an involuntary step backward. You want to bet your badge on that? John said quietly. The monster was revealed, but the battle was just beginning. The taser crackled in the officer's trembling hand as John stood like a wall between the weapon and the terrified child behind him. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dock, turning the peaceful evening into something from a nightmare. John could feel the little girl's tiny fingers clutching his leg, her quiet whimpers barely audible above the sound of waves lapping against the pier. "Stay back," the corrupt officer hissed, his facade completely gone now. Gone was any pretense of authority or duty. What remained was pure desperation, the cornered animal showing its true nature. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into. This goes deeper than you can imagine." John's response was cut off by a new voice, deep and unmistakable, coming from the boardwalk behind them. "Looks like someone could use some backup." Both John and the officer turned to see Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson approaching, his massive frame moving with deceptive speed across the wooden planks. He wasn't alone. Behind him came two other figures, both clearly off-duty police officers, their hands already reaching for their phones and radios. The Rock had been filming a scene nearby when crew members reported strange activity at the dock. As someone who had spent years building community relationships with law enforcement, he immediately recognized that something was catastrophically wrong when he saw a fellow officer threatening civilians. "Officer!" The Rock paused, squinting at the dirt-covered badge. "I can't read your number there. Want to tell me what's happening here?" The corrupt cop's eyes darted between the growing number of witnesses. His carefully planned isolation was crumbling. "This is official police business. All of you need to back off now." Official business involved threatening a child and John Cena with a taser. The Rock asked, his voice carrying the kind of control power that had commanded movie sets and wrestling arenas. "That's interesting police work." One of the real officers stepped forward, speaking into his radio. "This is Detective Martinez, off duty. I need immediate backup at the Long Beach Pier, Dock 7. We have an officer-involved situation that needs immediate supervisor response." The corrupt cop's hand shook as he kept the taser pointed at John. "You're all making a huge mistake. I have protection. People who will make sure this disappears." "Protection?" The Rock laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Brother, you just threatened a child in front of 4 witnesses, including 2 celebrities and 2 cops. What kind of protection you think can make that disappear?" John could hear sirens in the distance now, growing louder by the second. The little girl had stopped whimpering and was watching the scene with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe that adults were actually trying to help her. "Let me tell you something," John said, his voice carrying across the water. "I've faced a lot of opponents in my life. Some were tough, some were mean. But you're just a coward who hurts children. And cowards always fall." The officer's face twisted with rage. "You think your fame protects you? You think being on TV makes you heroes? I've been cleaning up streets for 15 years while you play pretend for cameras." "Cleaning up streets?" The Rock stepped closer, his presence commanding. "Is that what you call terrorizing a 4-year-old girl?" "She's nothing," the man screamed, his composure completely gone. "Street trash. No family, no records, no one who cares if she lives or dies. The system can't handle them all. Someone has to make the hard choices." The words hung in the air like poison. Detective Martinez spoke quietly into his radio. "We're going to need child services and internal affairs. Now." More sirens approached, their red and blue lights beginning to paint the evening in harsh, urgent colors. The corrupt officer looked around wildly, realizing his situation was hopeless. His hand trembled as he lowered the taser slightly. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "There are others. This goes all the way up. If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me." "Good," John said simply. "Take them all." The first patrol cars arrived, their officers moving with practiced efficiency. But instead of the arrest everyone expected, something strange happened. The lead officer, a sergeant with silver hair and cold eyes, approached the scene with a frown. "What's the situation here?" Sergeant Collins asked, but his tone suggested he already didn't like what he was seeing. Detective Martinez stepped forward. We have an officer who was attempting to harm a child. Multiple witnesses, clear evidence of... Officer Curtis has been working a difficult case, Collins interrupted. Street children are unpredictable. Sometimes force is necessary for everyone's safety. The Rock and John exchanged glances. Something was wrong. Very wrong. False. The Rock asked, his voice dangerous. You think threatening to drown a 4-year-old is necessary, false? Curtis straightened, emboldened by his sergeant's apparent support. These celebrities don't understand street work, Sergeant. They interfere with official business and then claim brutality when we do our jobs. John felt the little girl's grip tighten on his leg. She was trembling again, sensing that the danger might not be over. He knelt down and whispered, It's okay. I won't let anyone hurt you. But even as he said it, John realized they weren't just facing one corrupt cop. They were looking at something much bigger, much more dangerous. The corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. Detective Martinez seemed to realize it too. He stepped back and made another radio call, this time requesting federal oversight. The game was changing, and everyone on that dock knew it. The battle for one little girl was about to become a war against a system that had forgotten its purpose. The tension on the dock was thick enough to cut with a knife as more patrol cars arrived, their flashing lights turning the peaceful evening into a scene from a crime thriller. But something felt wrong to everyone present. The arriving officers weren't moving with the urgency the situation demanded. Instead, they seemed almost reluctant. Detective Martinez, the off-duty officer who had first called for backup, watched with growing alarm as his colleague began treating John Cena and the Rock like the criminals rather than Officer Curtis, who had just been caught attempting to murder a child. I need everyone to step back and let us handle this situation, Sergeant Collins announced, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. This is a complex case involving a difficult child who has been causing problems in the system. The little girl, still clinging to John's leg, looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. He's lying, she whispered, her voice barely audible. There are others, bad men who take kids like me. John knelt down to her level, his voice gentle but urgent. What's your name, sweetheart? MIA, she replied, her tiny voice breaking. My mommy didn't wake up last week. She was cold. I waited, but she never woke up. The Rock, who had moved closer during this exchange, felt his jaw clench with barely controlled rage. This child had been living on the streets after her mother died, completely vulnerable, and instead of protection, she had found predators wearing badges. Sergeant, the Rock addressed Collins directly. This little girl just told us her mother died and she's been living alone. Officer Curtis was about to throw her into the ocean. How exactly are they handling a difficult child? Collins's expression didn't change. Street children often make up stories. They learn to manipulate adults for sympathy. Curtis has years of experience dealing with these situations. John stood slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow over the sergeant. You mean attempted murder? Because that's what we all witness here. Curtis, emboldened by his supervisor's support, stepped forward. You celebrities think you understand the streets, but you don't. This kid has no family, no records, no future. The system is overwhelmed. Sometimes hard choices have to be made for the greater good. Detective Martinez had heard enough. He pulled out his personal phone and began recording, speaking clearly for the audio. This is Detective Martinez, Shield number 4427. I am witnessing what appears to be a cover-up of attempted child murder by Officer Curtis. Badge number. He squinted at the deliberately obscured badge. Badge number unclear due to tampering. Sergeant Collins appears to be obstructing justice. Put that phone away, Martinez, Collins snapped. You're interfering with official business. Official business. Martinez laughed bitterly. Sarge, I've been a cop for 12 years. I know what official business looks like, and this ain't it. The Rock stepped forward, his presence commanding attention from everyone present. Let me ask you something, Sergeant. How many other children has Officer Curtis handled in these difficult situations? How many other kids have you decided don't deserve protection? For the first time, Collins looked uncertain. The question had struck too close to something he didn't want exposed. Officer Curtis, however, seemed past caring about discretion. You want numbers? Fine. 37 kids in the last 3 years. All problems the system couldn't solve. All better off gone than growing up to be criminals and addicts like their parents. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the other officers who had arrived looked shocked by the casual admission of what could only be described as systematic murder. John pulled out his own phone, which had been recording the entire encounter. Did everyone hear that? 37 children. This isn't one bad cop. This is organized. Martinez was already on his radio, but this time he was calling outside their precinct. This is Detective Martinez requesting immediate FBI involvement. We have confession to multiple homicides involving minors. I repeat, we need federal intervention now. Sergeant Collins realized the situation was spiraling out of control. Curtis, shut up. Everyone shut up. This is getting blown out of proportion. Blown out of proportion. The Rock's voice carried across the water. A confession to killing 37 children is blown out of proportion? What planet are you living on? MIA tugged on John's shirt, drawing his attention back to her. When he knelt down, she whispered something that made his blood run cold. There are more police like him. They have a place where they take kids. Kids go in, but they don't come out. John looked up at the Rock, who had heard every word. Both men realized they had stumbled into something far bigger than one corrupt officer. This was a network, an organized system of predators who had turned their sworn duty to protect into a license to kill. Collins, John said, standing to his full height, I want you to listen to me very carefully. This little girl just told me about other officers in a place where children disappear. Now, you can either start helping us get to the truth, or you can go down with Curtis and everyone else involved in this nightmare. Collins looked around at the gathering crowd. News vans were arriving, drawn by reports of celebrities involved in a confrontation with police. Social media was already buzzing with cell phone videos taken by bystanders. The situation was becoming too public to contain. This is going to destroy careers, Collins said quietly. Good, The Rock replied. Maybe it's time for some careers to be destroyed. FBI vehicles were already approaching in the distance, their presence signaling that this had become much bigger than a local matter. The network was about to be exposed, but John realized that meant MIA and other potential victims were now in even greater danger from those who had the most to lose. The war for justice was just beginning. 6 months after that fateful evening on the Long Beach Pier, John Cena sat in a federal courtroom watching the final chapter of one of the largest police corruption scandals in California history unfold. The mahogany panel room was packed with reporters, federal agents, and families of victims, some seeking justice for children who would never come home, others hoping for answers they had waited years to receive. At the prosecutor's table, boxes of evidence told a story so horrific it had shocked even seasoned federal investigators. What had started with Officer Curtis's attempt to murder MIA had uncovered a network spanning 3 states, involving 4 to 7 law enforcement officers, 12 administrators, and a private security company that had been paid millions of dollars to make problem children disappear forever. Curtis, now dressed in an orange jumpsuit instead of a police uniform, sat with his head down as a judge read his sentence. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole for 37 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and abuse of authority under color of law. Sergeant Collins received 25 to life. Detective Martinez, who had blown the whistle and risked his career to expose the truth, had been promoted to lead a new task force dedicated to protecting vulnerable children. But the numbers told only part of the story. John thought about the children who had been saved because one little girl had the courage to whisper the truth to a stranger on a dock. The FBI had found the facility MIA had described, a remote compound disguised as a juvenile detention center where children with no advocates had been held, abused, and ultimately killed when they became too difficult to manage. 38 children had been rescued alive from that place. 38 futures restored because MIA had refused to stay silent. Mr. Cena. John looked up to see the federal prosecutor approaching. The judge would like to see you and MIA in chambers. There's something she wants to discuss. In the judge's private office, MIA sat in a chair that was too big for her, swinging her legs while holding the same stuffed panda she clutched that night on the pier. At 7 years old now, she was taller, stronger, and had the kind of confidence that came from knowing she was truly safe and loved. MIA, Judge Richardson said gently, Mr. Cena has asked to officially adopt you. Do you understand what that means? MIA nodded solemnly. It means is my real daddy now, not just my foster daddy. And Bella is my real sister. That's exactly right. And how do you feel about that? MIA looked at John with eyes that sparkled with joy instead of the terror he'd first seen in them. I feel like I'm home. The paperwork was signed, the legal process completed, but the real transformation had happened much earlier. It had begun the night John brought MIA to his house, and she met Bella, who had immediately declared that MIA was her sister and would share everything: toys, stories, and most importantly, safety. It had continued through months of counseling, patient bedtime stories, and slowly teaching MIA that not all adults were dangerous, that some could be trusted completely, that she deserved love, protection, and a future filled with possibilities. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. John had given countless interviews during the investigation and trials, but today felt different. Today was about celebration, not justice. Today was about new beginnings. Mr. Cena, one reporter called out, what would you say to other people who might witness something terrible happening to a child? John looked down at MIA, who was holding both his hand and Bella's, then back at the cameras. I'd say the same thing I tell my daughters every day. When you see someone who needs help, you help them. It doesn't matter if it's convenient. It doesn't matter if it's dangerous. It doesn't matter if other people are walking away. You don't walk away from a child in danger. Ever. The Rock, who had testified in multiple trials and had become an advocate for police reform, stepped forward. What John did that night wasn't heroic. It was human. The real tragedy is that so many people had walked past these situations before and done nothing. We can't let that be normal anymore. As they walked toward the courthouse steps, MIA tugged on John's sleeve. Daddy, can we go to the pier tonight? But the good part, not where the bad man was. John smiled, remembering how terrified she had been of water for months after that night. Now she loved the ocean, had learned to swim, and saw the pier as a place where her real life had begun, the life where she was protected, cherished, and given every opportunity to grow into whoever she wanted to become. Of course we can. Sweetheart, we can watch the sunset and count seagulls. And name them silly names. Especially that part. That evening, as the sun painted the Long Beach sky in shades of gold and rose, 3 figures stood at the pier railing. John held both girls' hands as they watched pelicans dive for fish and seagulls wheel overhead. The spot where nightmare had once unfolded was now just another beautiful place where family could make memories. MIA pointed to a particularly bold seagull that had landed nearby. What should we name that one? Daddy. John pretended to think seriously. How about Justice? She looks like she's keeping an eye on things, making sure everyone stays safe. MIA giggled. Justice is a good name for a seagull. Bella nodded in agreement. She can be the boss of all the other birds. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, John thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with one decision, the choice to not walk away when a child needed help. That single moment had saved not just Mia's life, but the lives of dozens of other children who might have become victims if the corruption had continued. More importantly, it had given him and Bella something precious, a complete family, bound not just by love but by the shared understanding that protecting each other was what families did. Ready to go home? John asked. Both girls nodded, tired but happy. As they walked back toward the car, MIA skipped between John and Bella, her earlier trauma transformed into resilience and joy. Daddy, MIA asked as John buckled her into her car seat. Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for not walking away. John kissed her forehead gently. Thank you for being brave enough to trust me. As they drove home through the California evening, past palm trees silhouetted against the star-filled sky, John reflected on how one moment of choosing courage over convenience had changed everything. The corrupt network had been dismantled, justice had been served, and most importantly, a little girl who had been discarded by the system had found her way home. Sometimes the difference between tragedy and triumph was simply refusing to look away when it mattered most. And sometimes that was enough to change the world.